Hello, I am Miss Oliva, and I'm going to help you with stuff from 1.5, which is point slope form and parallel and perpendicular lines and the profit equation. So I'm going to get started. Remember, you can always pause if I'm going too fast or rewind. Okay, so we did some of the point slope equation in 1.4. So hopefully you're already familiar with this. Remember, the M is your slope, and the x1 and y1 are the actual x and y from the point that you have. This x just stays x, and this y just stays y. So if I'm trying to use this equation because I know this point and this slope, I'm going to plug them in. Y minus the y, 3 times x minus the x. If they wanted this answer in point slope form, I would be done right now. But since it wants it in slope intercept form, this is basically just saying, get the y by itself. So I'm going to distribute over here. And then I'm going to move that 11 by adding. And that's it. So now I'm going to do the same thing, but this time they gave me 2 points, but did not give me the slope. So I'm going to have to take a second to find my slope first, and then I can do it the same way I just did. So remember the slope formula is this, and all that means is subtract the 2 y's on top and subtract the 2 x's on the bottom, and just make sure you do it in the same order. So I'm going to go ahead and start with this -3 on top. If you start with 2, that's fine also, but you just need to make sure you start with the same point on the bottom. So I have to start with the -6. Okay, -3 minus 2 is -5. Be careful down here because it was -6 minus -2, so that really turns into plus, and that gives me -4. And remember, a negative over a negative is always a positive. So that is my slope. So now I can do exactly what I did in this first one. I just need to pick one of these points, and it does not matter which one. So I'm just going to use this point because they're smaller numbers and this slope. Okay, so this is my point, and this is my slope. So y minus the y in my point, so 2, equals the slope, x minus my x, so that would be x minus -2. So I'm just going to change that to plus right now. So same idea, I'm going to distribute. Remember, 5/4 times x is just 5/4 x, so that's not too bad. But 5/4 times 2, you might want to just take a second to do that on the side, because make sure you get that that's 2 over 1, really. So I can reduce my 2 and my 4 first. Then I can say 5 times 1 and 2 times 1. So 5/2. And then my last step is just to add that 2 to both sides. But again, I'm going to go do that on the side. 5/2 plus 2 over 1. I'm going to need to change the 2 over 1 to something over 2. So that would become 4 over 2. So now when I add, I get 9 over 2. So final answer, y equals 5 over 4x plus 9 over 2. So obviously the fractions were probably the harder part with this one, but you can use your calculator if you want. I just did it all by hand to remind you of some of our fraction rules. All right, the next thing is talking about parallel and perpendicular lines. So first, this is what they look like, but what's important is why they look like this. So these are 2 lines that will never hit, and the reason why is because whatever this one is doing as far as going up and over, this one is doing the exact same. And so what is that called? That's called the slope. So parallel lines will always have the same slope. Okay? Perpendicular lines will not have the same slope because they're obviously not parallel. They're hitting at some point. Excuse me. So Make sure you understand they're intersecting, but they're intersecting in a very special way. They are always making a 90-degree angle. That's what makes them perpendicular. So this will only happen when they have very specific slopes. And the thing that they need to have is opposite, which means if one slope is positive, the other has to be negative, and that should make sense, right? This one's going up, that one's going down, but they also need to be reciprocals. So let's make sure we know what that means. Opposite reciprocal. So if one slope, so here's some examples. If one slope was negative 1/3, the other slope would be positive, and I need to flip that, so it would be positive 3. If one slope was 2/5, the other one would have to be negative 5/2. So do you see what opposite reciprocal means? So let's decide if these examples are parallel, which means same slope, or are they perpendicular, which means they have opposite reciprocal slope, or are they neither, which just means something else has happened. Neither of those. So let's look at A. This one has a slope of 2/5, and this one has a slope of negative 5/2. We just talked about that example, so this one is definitely perpendicular. Now look at the next one. There's an issue. You cannot start this problem. You cannot decide if they're parallel or perpendicular if it's not in the right form for you to easily tell the slope. These I could do right away because they're both in they're both in slope intercept form, meaning I could clearly see the slope. So first thing I'm going to need to do for this one is get the y by itself. So 3y equals 3 plus 6x. And now I'm going to divide everything by 3. I'm kind of running out of room, so I'm going to write this one over here. This would become 1 plus 2x. So this is one of my equations. So I can clearly see the slope now. So now let's see what's happening in the other one. I'm going to subtract 7. So I'm just keeping the y on the right because it doesn't matter. I'm just trying to get it by itself. And now I'm going to divide everything by negative 9. That is not going to be pretty here, but here it works out nicely to 2x minus over minus is plus 7/9. And we don't care about that 7/9 because what we're looking at is the slopes. They both have a slope of 2. So even though there was a lot going on here, these are parallel. Same slopes, parallel. All right, next we're going to talk about one more form. So we've talked about slope-intercept form, and we've talked about point-slope form, and now we're going to talk about standard form. This is what standard form is. The A, the B, and the C are not anything special. They're just numbers, but they do have to be integers, which means there are no fractions or decimals, and A, so the number in front of the X, needs to be positive. So it's just moving stuff around so that you have all numbers that are not decimals or fractions, and this first one is positive. So let's try this equation. Write an equation passing through this point and parallel to this line. So we're going to talk about that in a second. Write your answer in slope-intercept form and standard form. So first of all, what in the world is it trying to tell me if it's telling me that I need to be parallel to this line? Well, remember that parallel means same slope. So they're basically trying to tell me what the slope is, except this is not in the form that I like it to be to tell what the slope is. So I'm going to get the y by itself, and then I can see what the slope is. So they're basically saying, hey, can you make an equation that has slope of -5. That's what all of this was telling me. If I want to be parallel to that line, I want the same slope as that line, so my slope needs to be -5. So now don't I have a point and a slope? So I'm going to use the point slope equation to get started because those are the things that I have. And then I'll go from here to give them the two answers they want. So y minus -3, because that's my y value, equals -5 times x minus 3. So since this is not one of the forms they want, I'm now going to change it to slope-intercept form by getting that y by itself. First thing I'm going to do is change minus a negative to a plus, and over here I'm going to distribute. Last step, -3. All right, here is my answer in slope-intercept form. So if that's all they wanted, I would be done. But they also want standard form. So let's talk about standard form. Well, in standard form, I don't want any of these numbers. Remember, that's a 1, 5, 12. I don't want any of them to be fractions or decimals, and that's not happening. So that's good. So now I just need to make sure I get it in the right form, which is whatever the x is with plus whatever the y is with equaling the constant, the number by itself. So don't I really just need to move that 5x over by adding it? And I'm going to write it in the right order. So instead of y plus 5x, I'm going to write 5x plus y equals 12. Just double check, no fractions, no decimal, and that first thing is positive. So I'm good. So this is standard form. So let's do another one with harder numbers. So I'm doing the exact same thing. I'm given a point and I'm given an equation and I want my new equation, but this time they're asking me to be perpendicular to this equation. So I just need to keep that in mind because when I get this in the right form, I'm not using the exact slope that I see. I'm going to need to make it the opposite reciprocal. So starting with the equation they gave me, let me just get the y by itself first. So I'm going to add the y to the other side first. And then I'm going to get rid of the 5x. Okay, so apparently -5 is the slope of this line. But remember, we're not doing parallel this time. So since they want perpendicular, my slope is going to be the opposite, which means it'll be positive, and the reciprocal. So instead of 5/1, I need to flip that to get 1/5. So here is my slope, here is my point. Now I can start by using the point slope formula. So y minus the y, which is -1.4, equals 1/5 x minus the x, 1.5. Let's start moving stuff around. Minus a negative is plus. 1/5 times x is 1/5 x. 1/5 times the negative is going to be negative, but I'm going to go ahead and just use my calculator for this one. 1/5 times -1.5 is negative, which we already knew, 0.3. I'm going to leave that as a decimal for now. Minus 1.4 on both sides. Y equals 1/5 x minus 1.7. And now let's see how we can get this in the right form. So first, slope-intercept. We are done with slope-intercept. And I think they are fine with decimals. So we're halfway done. But now the trickier part this time is going to be getting it in standard form. So first, let's get that x on the other side. So let's move the 1/5 x. So again, instead of writing y minus this, I'm going to write -1/5 x plus y just to have it in the correct order. Okay. I can rewrite Well, first, why don't we just get rid of the negative? If I don't want the x to be negative, let me multiply every single thing by -1. So that'll make this positive, this negative, and this positive. So just changed the sign of everything. But now I want to get rid of fractions and decimals. So first thing I notice is I have a decimal over here, and it just has one number after the decimal. So the first thing I could do is multiply everything by 10, and that would turn this into 17. But maybe I'm not quite sure what it would do here. So again, I'm just going to use my calculator for this. 1/5 times 10 works out nicely. This is like a -1, so that times 10 gives me 10. And this times 10, like we said, just moves that decimal. And we're good. No decimals, no fractions, and the first thing is now positive. So standard form is definitely the trickiest one because it's just a very specific way to do it. What's the benefit of standard form? Standard form is the nicest form if you were just trying to find the x and the y intercepts, because it'd be very easy to plug in 0 for the x to find the y, and vice versa, plug in 0 to the y to find the x. So that's what standard form is good for. But slope intercept form and point slope form are better for graphing. Okay, what if it wanted me to write the equation of the line that passed through this point and is parallel to the y-axis? Well, let's first think about what that means, and then we can decide how we're going to do this. So remember, and we did talk about being parallel to the y-axis before, this is the x-axis, this is the y. So being parallel to the y-axis would mean any type of vertical line. Since it's a vertical line, we know the slope is undefined, but they didn't ask that, but just as a reminder. But we also know the type of equation that gives you a vertical line. It is always an equation where the x equals some number, and that's it. So if at some point we need to go through the point -911, so -911, let's just say that's here, what would the equation of this line be? Well, isn't this the line where all of the x's are the same? So if an x is -9 here, it must be -9 everywhere. So let me repeat that. So this is your final answer. This is the equation. So we didn't need to do anything with like point slope or slope intercept because this is one of the special lines. Anytime you're dealing with a vertical line or a horizontal line, it's a special line and we don't do it the same way we do the other ones. So because it asked me to be parallel to the y-axis, I knew I had to be a vertical line. And the only way a vertical line could go through this point is if they had the same x value. So my line must be x equals -9. So if you want to pause and try the next one, go for it. But then you can push play and see if you got it right. So this time we want to be parallel to the x-axis. So doesn't that mean that we need to be some kind of horizontal line? And the point we need to go through is 2, 5. So I need to be a horizontal line that goes through the point 2, 5. So again, just as a refresher, we know the slope is 0, but we also know what type of equation gives us this special line, and it's when y equals a number, because every single point on this line has the same y. In this case, since it's going through this point, it must have the same y value as that point. So final answer, this is the equation. So these are special cases. These are the two special lines. We don't do them the same way we would do anything else. All right, and lastly, putting some of this together in word problems. Let's read this first one. A salesperson makes a base salary of $300 per week. So base salary means that's happening no matter what. Every week you make $300 no matter what. Plus $15 or sorry, 15% commission on sales. This depends on how much you sell. So let's say you sold $10, you would only get 15% of 10. Let's say you sold $500 that week, you would get 15% of 500. So it depends on what you get there. Okay, so this happens no matter what. The 15% is based on how much we sell. It wants us to write a linear function to model the salesperson's weekly sales, S of X. So it just means that's what we're gonna name the equation. You know how we could name it Y, or we can name it fancier. So we're gonna say S of X for X dollars in sales. So this is part A. So however much we sold, we're gonna call X because we don't know that. So what do we get? What's our salary? Our salary for a week is 300, remember, no matter what, but then also 15% of whatever we sell. Well, we're saying that we're going to call X the amount we sell. So how do I show that I want to add 15% of this X? 0.15 times X. To find 15% of something, you multiply it by 0.15. So this is my equation. This is how I'll get my salary. So B is asking us to find S of 6,000. What does that mean? They're telling me the X is 6,000, which means I must have sold $6,000 worth of stuff that week. So what I'm trying to find is, what is my salary for the week if I sold $6,000 worth of stuff? Because I don't get that 6,000, unfortunately. But what do I get? I get 15% of it plus my base salary of 300 a week. So I'm going to do 6,000 times 0.15 plus 300. Apparently, if I sold that much, I would get this much in a week. But the next week, I might sell nothing. And if I sold nothing the next week, I would only get that 300. So it just depends. So they said also interpret it its meaning. So if I sell $6,000 in sales, I make $1,200 for the week. So that's interpreting it. That's just saying, what do these numbers mean? Okay, so another one. The fixed and variable costs to produce an item are given along with the price which the item is sold. Okay, so when they give me the fixed cost, this is a cost that happens once. And no matter what, right? No matter what I do, I have to pay that no matter what. But to make each item, there's a certain cost. So this cost is what it costs per item. So it will depend on how many items I make, how much I'm going to spend on that, right? And then after I do all those things, pay my fixed cost and add the cost per item, I'm now going to try to sell this item. And here is what I'm trying to sell, again, per item. Okay? So there's going to be a couple different formulas that we're going to have to deal with. First, we're going to want a formula for the cost. So it's just this and this that have to do with cost, right? This first one is the fixed one that happens once. So I'm not going to multiply it by X or anything like that. I'm just going to say I have to pay that once. But I also have to pay this $33.50 per item, which means that whatever X is going to stand for however many items I make, right? Let's say I make 20 items, 20 times this plus this is what it would cost me to do that. Okay, for the revenue is the money that you like bring in. So the only thing that will give me revenue is the fact that I'm selling these items for $33.70. So my revenue is not $33.70. It's $33.70 per item. So again, times X. And then finally, how do we get a profit? Because again, this is not how much money I'm actually making, because don't forget I'm spending all of this, right? So profit is the amount of revenue, however much money you're bringing in, minus the cost. So in this specific problem, it's going to be that 3370x minus all of this. So if I have more than one thing to subtract, I need that parenthesis. So revenue minus cost. Let's make that a little easier to deal with. So don't you see that I could do this minus the 3350x since they both have x's? So 33.7 minus 33.5 gives me 0.2x. And then I have to subtract the 2894. So that's as nice as I can make this profit equation. Now it wants me to find my break-even point. Break-even point means we've sold and our cost is the exact same as how much we're bringing in, the revenue. The cost is equal to the revenue, so we broke even. We haven't made any money and we haven't lost any money. So now if I do more, I'll start making the money. So where's our break-even point? So we take this equation and we set it equal to 0 to see basically when will our profit be 0, meaning we haven't made anything, but we haven't lost anything. So I'm going to add the 2894 to the other side. And now I'm going to divide by 0.2. And I get 14,470, which is a lot, but that should make sense because to make each item, it costs this. And to sell, I'm only asking for this. So I'm only asking for 20 cents more than how much it costs for me to make it. And that doesn't even take into account that I'm paying all of this too. So it's going to take me a lot of items to make and sell before I'm breaking even. And here's the exact number, 14,470. And we're going to do one more that's similar to that. So a lawn service company charges $53 for each lawn maintenance call. So this is how much they're charging, which is mean this is the money they're bringing in. So this is how they're getting revenue. The fixed monthly cost of $688. So this occurs once each month, includes telephone service and depreciation of equipment. The variable costs of labor, gasoline, and taxes amount to $38 per lawn. So these are both costs. This one happens once, and this one happens per lawn. So how would I write my cost function this time? Well, my cost is definitely going to be 688. Again, we're just talking about 1 month at a time. 688 plus 38 per lawn. So how do I show that? 38 times X, because I'm not sure how many lawns I'm going to do. But if I did 10, I would plug a 10 in here to see how much it costs. If I did 100 lawns, I'd put 100 in here and see how much it costs. But for the revenue, the money I'm bringing in, it's only the fact that I'm charging this $53 for each lawn call, which means per lawn. So 53X. This is how much I'm spending each month. This is how much money I'm bringing in each month. But my actual profit, remember, is going to be my revenue minus my cost. So the 53X minus all of that cost. So again, we can make this a little nicer by doing the 53X minus the 38X. So that would be 15X. And then we still have this minus 688. So that is my profit equation. Now they're asking, the business will make a profit if blank or more lawn maintenance calls are made per month. So they want to know how many lawns will I have to do to make a profit, to actually get money, have more than I spent. Well, let's start by just finding that break-even point, right? Even though they're not asking me for the break-even point, they're asking me for how many I'd have to sell to make money. Let's start here. How many would we have? How many lawns would we have to do to just break even? So I'm going to add my 688 and divide by 15. So my break-even point is 45.86 repeating. So it's a decimal, which is weird for a lawn, but let's pay attention to what they're asking in. If this is how many lawns I would have to do to make exactly $0, then to actually make a profit, I would have to do anything more than this, right? So again, instead of using a weird decimal, because we normally just say I've done this many lawns a day, not 45.8, we're just going to go up to the next whole number and say, it probably wouldn't be a lot of money, but if I went up to 46, I'd at least be into the positives. I'd at least be making something. So I need to do 46 or more lawns to actually make a profit. All right, and the last question. If 39 maintenance calls are made for a given month, so they're basically telling me the X, right? How much money will the lawn service make or lose? Write the answer to the nearest cent. So remember, when you're trying to do something to the nearest cent, that means hundredth, right? Because money, we normally have two decimals like this, right? So even though this wasn't money, but that's how we normally write money, right? Like $1.75. So that's the hundredth spot. Okay, back to here. So we're talking about basically how much money do we make or lose? So isn't that talking about the profit? So let me go back to my profit equation and let's see what happens. This should have an X. Let's see what happens when my X is 39. So 15 times 39 minus 688. If I had to guess, make an educated guess, I could tell you right now, I'm probably going to lose money. Because didn't we just decide that we needed to do 46 lawns to make anything? And now they're asking me what happens when I only did 39 lawns. So I'm probably going to lose money. So let's see what we get. 15 times 39 minus 688. I get negative 103. But that's not the way they asked the question, because they said, how much do you make or lose? So instead of saying, our profit is negative 103, I'm just going to word that as, we will lose $103. That's what that negative means, right? That we're losing that money. So because of the way they worded the question, this is how I would say my answer. Okay, and that's it for 1.5. Email me or text me if you have any questions, and good luck.